In the city of Mitchell, Australia, friends Jason and Mick are deciding what to do with their free time. Mick suggests a trip, and knowing that Jason will bring his girlfriend Natasha, he asks her to invite one of her friends. While she calls a girl named Melanie, Mick tells his friend about the horror stories of Charlie's farm in Mitchell. He says there was a famous crime in the 80s, and since then, no one has lived there. Jason likes the idea, but tells Mick to only share that part with the girls when they arrive at their destination. The next morning, Melanie joins the trio, and Mick gets excited about the girls' beauty. Jason warns that the trip will be focused on nature, and that the two will have to be without social media for a few days, as there will be no signal where they plan to camp. Melanie then takes the opportunity on the way to use her phone while getting to know her future tentmate. After 8 hours on the road, Jason says they are still a little far due to the stops they made along the way. However, the girls are tired, and Mick also wants to stretch his legs, suggesting they camp right there until the next day. Everyone agrees to the idea, and Jason first stops at a diner, where Mick tries to learn about the farm. He talks to an old man named Blue, who has lived in the area since he was born, and is with his friend Fred. The mood becomes tense when Mick mentions Charlie's farm, and Blue's expression changes completely, saying that no one should ever go there. Fred starts to talk about the disappearances, but the bartender cuts the conversation and says it's all a legend. Seeing that Natasha is paying attention to them, Jason also thinks it's better to stop talking and decides to leave, but the strategy doesn't work. The two girls have already noticed that they are hiding something from them and start a fight in the parking lot. When Mick starts to mock Blue's demeanor, trying to minimize the danger, Fred steps in to defend his friend. He says that Blue reacts this way when Charlie's farm is mentioned because he was there when the crimes occurred. This only makes Mick more excited about the visit, but it has the opposite effect on Natasha, who hadn't even known about any crime until now. Fred advises her to leave, as her boyfriend is taking her to a very bad place. It's then that Mick starts to cruelly mock his warnings, and Fred loses his patience. Other diners in the cafe seem a bit shocked when he decides to give the youngsters what they want and explains the way to the farm. Wanting to avoid a fight, the girls insist on leaving, and Mick gets in the car. The group camps a few kilometers ahead for the night, and everyone pressures Mick to tell them everything he knows. He says that the couple John and Meredith Wilson lived on the farm with their son Charlie. John was a serial killer who attacked young travelers and consumed part of his victims. His wife was also involved in the crimes, and the hostages suffered for several days, being mistreated even in front of the boy. Until one day, the residents of Mitchell got tired of the savagery and banded together to confront the Wilsons. John died in that confrontation, but Meredith fled with Charlie, and neither was ever seen again. Melanie doesn't really believe this story and asks why the neighbors didn't call the police instead of surrounding the farm, but Mick can't explain that part. He says that not even the bodies were found, and part of the legend is that they became food for wild boars, a type of pig that is even larger than a wild boar. No one knows what happened to Charlie and his mother, but Mick thinks Blue might know more than he wanted to reveal since, according to Fred, he was one of the residents who was there that night. Natasha says she has a bad feeling about this macabre visit and doesn't understand the fun in going to such a place, but her friend sides with the boys. Melanie thinks it could be fun and promises her friend that they will leave if she feels bad there. She also changes her mind about sharing the tent with Mick now that she knows more about his personality and his somewhat gross habits. The next day, Natasha still seems uneasy and remembers what Fred said about the recent disappearances. Jason says that many people go missing in the Australian bush, and it's all nonsense. Back on the road, he asks Mick to repeat the directions and discovers that he only remembers half of them. So Jason asks his girlfriend to call a friend of his named Tony Stewart. Mick is shocked to hear that name, as Tony is a famous boxing champion. Since the signal is already very poor out there, Jason parks to talk to Tony better while the others wait in the car. He explains how to get to the infamous farm, but warns that a lot of people really disappear there and recommends the youngsters be very careful. Following his instructions, the group arrives at the farm's gates shortly after, and Mick gets excited to see the name Wilson, confirming at least part of the story about that place. However, Jason discovers that the gate is locked and becomes very irritated about it. Natasha suggests they look for another entrance, but Tony had said that the farm is immense, and this could take a long time. Changing his tone, Jason says that actually, it's even better if they proceed on foot, leaving the car right there. Melanie laughs at the idea, thinking it's a joke, but he assures her that the house can't be too far from the main entrance, and Mick, as always, supports him. He also tells Melanie that the exercise will do her good, and she takes that as an insult to her physique, becoming even angrier with him. Thus, everyone grabs their essential belongings and jumps over the gate. The walk turns out to be extremely long, and the girls won't stop complaining, but the worst is still to come. When Jason finally spots the Wilson house, he announces that the four of them will sleep inside that night. Getting closer, it is clear that the state of the house is truly complete abandonment. Melanie asks who will have the courage to go in first, and Mick reminds them that the horror fan is Jason. But Natasha is so irritated that she takes the lead herself, saying that it's all a big stupidity. The interior is even worse than the facade, as various broken objects lie scattered on the floor, and everything is in total disarray. The walls are covered with graffiti from visitors like them, with inscriptions like, "I survived Charlie's farm," and even hearts with couples' names. Melanie tries to open a door that is stuck, and Mick insists on helping her, stepping on an old teddy bear as soon as he enters the room. Natasha is startled to see her friend stuffing the toy into her bag, and this gives Mick an even worse idea. He says that those objects could fetch good money online, since it seems that room hasn't been raided before. Natasha hates the idea, and says that just Melanie's teddy bear is souvenir enough, not wanting anyone to take anything more from there. When the wind makes one of the doors slam loudly, Melanie lets out a scream but immediately follows it with a laugh, clearly having fun with the scares. Natasha finally agrees to spend the night in the house, but insists that everyone sleeps in the same place, and even Melanie agrees with that. Trying to get into the mood, she also leaves her names recorded on the wall as just another group of curious survivors of the experience. In a flashback, we see the moment when the residents invade the house, and Blue finds the last of the victims still tied to the bed. His companions also discover human remains hidden in various other spots around the house. Meredith tells Charlie to hide in the barn and is soon found by the neighbors. She says that her son died a year ago, and Blue does not quite believe her, but the others say that a child like him won't last solo anyway. Thus, Charlie stays hidden and watches those people assaulting his mother until she finally stops moving. Back in the present, Jason suggests they go out to explore more, and everyone rejects the idea, including Mick. He is forced to postpone the adventure until the next day, and then everyone settles down in their sleeping bags. In the middle of the night, Melanie has the impression of seeing a person covered in rags standing in the middle of the room, watching the youngsters, but just goes back to sleep, thinking it's a nightmare. Exhausted from the previous day, the four of them only wake up after noon, and Mick is surprised to see two strangers approaching the house. They introduce themselves as Gordon and Alyssa, tourists from Sydney who also heard about the haunted farm. Jason asks where the rest of the group is, and they reply that it's just the two of them. Hearing this, Natasha offers them breakfast, and the group welcomes the couple of adventurers. When Melanie decides to show the teddy bear to Alyssa, she discovers that the toy is no longer in her bag. Suspecting it might be a prank, Natasha presses the guys to confess, but they genuinely don't know what happened. Then, Melanie tells them about what she saw in the middle of the night, but no one takes her very seriously, and she convinces herself that it was just a nightmare. After eating, the group splits into 3 pairs to explore as much as possible and agrees to meet back there before nightfall. Mick is left as Melanie's partner, and she soon begins to complain about the smell, but he swears it wasn't him this time. There's a hole in the ground a little ahead, and he says the odor might be coming from there. When Mick bends down to peek down below, she suddenly gives him a scare, and his lack of awareness only makes the guy even more infatuated. Nearby, Natasha is still worried about this division into pairs, but Jason says this is Mick's chance to be with Melanie. Not realizing that someone is watching them, Natasha laughs and says that her friend isn't that easy. Little does she know that Melanie is taking off her dress right at that moment, ready to swim in the river with Mick, who has never been happier to have a waterproof camera. Meanwhile, Alyssa and Gordon arrive at the barn, where he gets excited about a grotesque-looking axe and warns that he will take it home later. Leaving the axe at the door, they enter the barn, and Alyssa complains about the horrible smell. Gordon isn't bothered by it, and seems fascinated by all of it, saying it must have been untouched for decades. However, Alyssa shows him a bed that looks like it has been used recently. He disagrees with her and repeats that there is nothing to fear, but agrees to call the others before continuing to rummage through those things. The axe strikes his chest as soon as he reaches the door, and Alyssa starts screaming when she sees a huge man attacking her boyfriend. Panicking, she slams the barn door and bolts it, running to hide. The man easily breaks down the door and begins to hunt for the intruder, overturning everything and roaring in rage. A noise catches his attention, but it ends up being a false alarm, making him even angrier. After searching for a few more minutes, he hears a faint cry and smiles, knowing he has found what he was looking for. Alyssa is hidden behind some stacked barrels, and the man grabs her by the hair, smashing her head against the tractor tire to silence her screams. He lays her down on the ground and arranges her arms as if he wants to make her comfortable, but then pushes the vehicle forward with a cruel roar and is disappointed to see that she is still groaning. Climbing on the wheel, he uses all his weight to push the tire down until he hears the sound of a crushed skull and celebrates victory with a laugh. On the other side of the farm, Natasha and Jason find another barn, and she says she won't go in there no way. Laughing at her fear, Jason asks her to at least give him 5 minutes inside and swears they will leave afterward. Meanwhile, Tony Stewart is at home with his wife Nance and can't stop thinking about his young friends, afraid they may have done something stupid. He says he is trying to talk to them all day, and Nance replies that there probably isn't any signal in the area of the farm. However, Tony says that this means they are still there, since he made it clear that it is a dangerous place and they shouldn't stay long. To make matters worse, he says he spoke with Natasha's brother, who seems to hate Jason and thinks the guy only gets into trouble. Nance replies that he himself has gotten into all kinds of messes and gets angry when he says he's going to take a trip to the farm to check if the boys are okay. She says they are all grown up and should know what they are doing, but Tony can't settle down without checking. At the river, Mick and Melanie are much closer than before, and she laughs upon seeing his swimsuit floating on the surface. The fun ends when the maniac from the barn appears at the top of the hill, watching the two with a threatening air. He starts to wave mockingly, and Mick gets so irritated by the intrusion that he decides to go confront him, even without his swimsuit. Melanie tiptoes out of the water and begins to put on her dress while whispering to Mick, asking him not to get too close. Always more confident than he should be, Mick stops right in front of the maniac and insults him, telling Melanie that he seems to have some mental problem. The man thrusts the knife down at just the right spot, separating Mick from his greatest pride in life. Not satisfied with this, he picks up the organ from the ground and pushes it into Mick's mouth. Upon seeing him collapse lifelessly, Melanie runs away, and the maniac seems thrilled with the hunt. His yellowed eyes confirm his identity, and we see that this is indeed Charlie, who has lived hidden in the barn all these years. Running after Melanie through the brush, he catches up to her in a few minutes and throws her to the ground. After scouring her body with the machete, he decides to finish her off in a more original way and grabs her tongue. With a violent pull, he tears the whole bottom half of her face off and leaves her in the bushes, satisfied. In the other barn, Natasha is losing her patience, as much more than 5 minutes have passed, and Jason still hasn't come out. She starts calling for him, very angry, but he doesn't reply. Tony arrives at the main house and calls his name when she decides to enter the barn. Walking in the dark, she pleads for her boyfriend to respond and begins to cry until Jason finally appears, signaling for her to be quiet. He pulls her down under a table and explains that the two are not alone, but Natasha thinks it's yet another of his lame pranks and starts yelling at him. Charlie, who is really there with them, hears the argument and approaches with heavy steps, while Jason desperately squeezes Natasha's mouth. She hears the animalistic grunts until she also sees him, finally understanding that the threat is real. When Charlie moves away, the two emerge from their hiding place to try to escape, but can't open the door and end up huddling in a dark corner. It's then that Tony arrives and comes face to face with Charlie. But as it's too dark in there, he thinks it's Jason and starts talking to him. The machete comes at him with such force that it pierces the wall and nearly hits Natasha on the other side. Tony quickly realizes this isn't Jason, but doesn't back down, and Charlie himself seems excited by the prospect of a fight. Tony lands several blows to his head, but nearly crumbles each time Charlie retaliates. After a brief advantage, in which Tony repeatedly strikes him in the back, the maniac grabs his face and pushes his right eye toward a protruding nail. However, Tony manages to resist the force of the other and even frees one hand to punch him. The fight continues as the young couple crawls toward the exit quietly. Jason says they need to help their friend and attacks Charlie from behind just as he is about to slit Tony's throat. Natasha can hardly believe it when she sees the boxer fall to the ground, lifeless, and right afterward, Jason also meets his end. He only has time to tell her to run before Charlie slits his throat with the machete. After a moment in shock, she runs out of the barn, and Charlie immediately chases after her. He pursues her down a long corridor until they reach the farm gate, and Natasha manages to get into the car before he catches up to her. Roaring with rage, he jumps on the hood and smashes the windshield with his foot. Natasha wakes up tied up and inside a wooden cage, in a place where the smell is unbearable. With a great effort, she manages to loosen the ropes and breaks the side slats, soon discovering where the smell comes from. That place is filled with bodies at various stages of decomposition, and among the various belongings of all those missing people. Natasha grabs a necklace with a heart pendant, hoping to have some proof that will bring the police there later, and doesn't even see the teddy bear on the table. Then she finds a ladder and starts to climb, but a moving shadow above her shows that this is the wrong path, as Charlie is coming through there right now. Quickly descending, she pretends to be dead as he passes by, then climbs back up, nearly dying of fright when she sees an outstretched arm toward her. However, she sees that it is Old Blue who has come to save her, and the two hurry to get to his car until suddenly, Charlie appears and throws an axe into her back. Natasha sees that Blue and his rifle are lying right between her and Charlie. Deciding to take a risk, she runs over and grabs the weapon, shooting a round right in the brutish man's chest. The gun jams before she can shoot again, so she starts kicking Charlie to make sure she killed him. Since he doesn't move, she says goodbye with a curse and goes for Blue's car, trying to grab the keys through the window. It's then that she sees Charlie's reflection right behind her and turns just in time to be impaled by the rifle barrel.